time. Appreciate your participation. And here we go. Welcome, Ernest and Tom. Thank you for joining us for our monthly Datocracy. I was telling Ernest beforehand, like in the last month, it feels like it's been a decade of innovations in artificial intelligence with all the leaks and open source and everything else. So let me get the other one out of the way. And so I'll turn it over to Ernest. Maybe you have a paper you wanted to present. We'll spend maybe 15, 20 minutes on that, on you presenting, and then we can react and discuss next steps.
Okay, so let me share my screen here. Okay, you can see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so well, in the past couple of months, I've been chatting with you guys about ChatSMK. My answer to, or the ChatGPT, I guess. I've always, in the past few months, couple of years, I've heard this AI talk, and the term is always, I never liked it. It's artificial intelligence. It's not even intelligence. It's just machine learning. It's just a bunch of calculations done to compute statistics and probabilities. But we still, this is the technology we have now that people seem enthralled with. That it takes our knowledge and presents it back to us, and because we use powerful computers that can scour, or can take a big portion of the internet and books and all those things and analyze those, compute relationships, and that way it's able to answer queries or create works of art, written works too, that can pass bar exams and medical exams and all kinds of things. But it has also drawbacks. We've seen that it has hallucinations. If it's not bounded, it can declare its love for reporters and ask them to leave their wives. And it has also some serious legal issues, like and that I think is important, because the people, the entities that hold vast amount of data, and the Reddits and the I guess Twitter, all those platforms that can from which this AI is trained, they can close that. They can say, no, you cannot access our content because not if you pay, without paying. I saw a video yesterday or the day before about somebody having read the user agreement of OpenAI. I used to try to read those things, but I haven't used ChatGPT, so I haven't used it, and I haven't found the need to read the user agreement. But it's pretty terrible. It's like, if you use it, essentially, if somebody tries to sue, is one of the worst parts. Is somebody tries to sue OpenAI because ChatGPT gave you the wrong answer to something, and even if it's using copyrighted material, then what you signed is saying you will pay for OpenAI's lawyers, and so they would be able to hire the professional, expensive lawyers, and then, hey, you pay for our representation because you agreed to indemnify us. So I don't know if that's gonna be a thing, but it is in the contract. It is in the contract that people agree on when they click agree. So and also the artists, I've seen stories about young artists that essentially their careers have been cut short because just by publishing their works, this AI can train on those works, and then somebody can ask, I don't know, was it that DALL-E or other systems to say, create this work of art in the style of so and so. So that is kind of devastating for young artists that are not established, but they're starting to. But the systems can take their work and manipulate it and create other similar works to them. So why would anybody pay for expensive art when they can just go to a chatbot and ask for that and get it? So there are issues with the systems, regardless of how advanced they are. So, but my take is like, well, I don't want to rely on stuff that is using data that I did not vet. I don't know how accurate it is, and it's themselves are prone to inaccuracies, like I said, hallucinations and plagiarism and errors also. So, but what if people had their own data already? Some of these systems create models or they open source tools that, and these I learned quite recently, that let you plug in your own data to train their models, so that you will have control over that, and that's cool. I'm like, oh man, this is for the answer to my answer. But still, these systems operate at the language level. So they see some words and they compute the relationship with them, so they can predict the next words, or they can answer queries according to the content that you provide as input, and they can produce some output. But we can operate at a deeper level. We can operate at the actual knowledge level. So that's essentially my vision, that I have my data, I have created it, I have my knowledge essentially. So what if I can encode that knowledge in a way that is readable? It's not parameters, it's not a whole bunch of weights and values. It's actual relationship that you can encode, you can write. We have books and they tell us how nature works. So what if we can encode that knowledge in a way that systems can understand it, and also us as humans can understand it, so that we can always go back to the knowledge and say, oh, this is why the system gave me that answer, because I can see into its mind, because its mind is my knowledge. So I've always have thought of or disliked black boxes. Systems can identify tumors and cats and dogs and animals, but they cannot tell you why they think that this is a cat or a dog, or there's a tumor in there. They just spit it out because of the mathematics, the statistics. But if when people own their knowledge, they can put that knowledge in there. So there's no need to train anything, because the training is done intrinsically, but just by encoding the information using the relationship that you or experts deem appropriate. You know, like
You gonna scroll down?
site-
Or are you still on the same page?
Oh no, I'm still providing an overview.
Okay.
So yeah, what was I? So yes, encoding your knowledge and not letting a system decipher it. Although those systems can find relationships that people don't are aware of, that it's kind of you discover that those relationships, and that's good. But for the most part, I think that human beings should encode that knowledge. That's their expertise. They trained, a medical doctor trains for several years, and then residents to establish their knowledge. So that kind of thing should be that people should be able to encode it and then share with others. So this paper talks about that. This is a draft, so I haven't had the abstract yet. But the introduction talks about having fearing things like this is magic, and this is going to take our jobs and all that stuff. Well, this is more kind of like people fear mongering. I guess they want to scare people into, I don't know, capitulating their power. Like, well, if these things are so powerful, well, people will have the option of not using them, right? So that's the simplest solution. Well, no, if people don't have to submit to these things if they don't want to, at least I hope that that's the case. That people are not forced into this using the systems. That they will see them as tools, useful tools, but still tools. But that I think people should have the option of actually building their own knowledge sets and using open source tools to manipulate them, so that they don't have to pay any company to do that knowledge work, or be at risk of prosecuting and copyright infringement. So I talk in the introduction. I talk about show people how these strings are trained with vast amounts of data, and very powerful systems. But if we encode the knowledge in the these relationships in the knowledge sets, we don't have to use all these expensive computers to learn, because the learning is done by us, and then we just encode that learning in our knowledge sets. So yeah, the Humane ChatGPT. This is touches on the point that these tools can't, for the most part, cannot explain the reason behind their conclusions or inferences. They just, oh, this is, and they can even justify the wrong answer. I've seen that. Like there's some videos or ChatGPT or one of them giving the wrong answer to something, but justifying it so well that you believe, oh, this must be true, but no, it is not true. It just that's the hallucination part. And to also part of the training is manipulating these weights, these parameters. But to do that, you have to be an expert in AI technology, and maybe you have to be you have to be part of the team who encoded the knowledge in the first place. But yeah, it's not something that anybody can just get in there and analyze. But with ChatSMK, you can, because it's things are reading in easy to understand language, that you can even use plain English to interpret. Because I advocate separation between knowledge and language. Right now we have all those things mixed up, which is why some is the cause of some of our problems with it. Language is not exact; it can be ambiguous. But if we can separate knowledge from language, then we can share knowledge with people who speak different languages. So that's the second. That's what the message that the Humane ChatGPT section talks about. Your models, that's where you have your knowledge and you encode it, and then you own it. And that's why you trust that what you get out of the tools is accurate, because you encoded the language, the knowledge, or you got it from entities that you trust, that they have the right principles and correct and ways to ensure correctness. So when you have trust with from the sources of knowledge, then everything is great. But and you don't have to fear that it isn't correct, and you don't have to fear that somebody's going to sue you for using that. So that's where this deep knowledge model, that's where you encode your knowledge in the data itself. So you don't have to have any system having to learn it. You encode it yourself. So I have this example of and it's very simple. It talks about activities, actions, and eating and drinking and crying. So I essentially model these things. So let me go to so this is the part of the knowledge model. So we have to identify things. Things have a mode, you can run fast or you can run quickly. That's a mode, and the quality and quantity. So these concepts, separate from language, are some of the essential concepts that we deal in our heads. Things, you identify things. So this is a person or the person. I have so many apples in my hand, and things like that. So we have the concept of thing. There's like it exists or doesn't exist, and this thing can have one or more, zero or more activities. And this is from both sides. Let's say a person is eating an apple. The person is has the activity of eating, but the apple is also in the activity of being eaten. So both of those objects have activities because of the actions of one. So we come to a person, and a person can be alive, hungry, thirsty, sleepy. And these are simple yes or no exclusive states. You're either alive or not. You can be both. And I model this using the exclusive or. People have trusted individuals and untrusted ones. So a baby can have its mom as a trusted individual, its parents, and people, and maybe an angry or a dog that is barks at the baby. Maybe that's not a trusted entity. Now, part of these properties and behaviors is what makes a thing, make the essence of a thing. So okay, a person have the in distress property, and when is that? Well, if the person is crying, if one of his current activities is crying, then that's in distress. Or if the person is hungry and thirsty, yeah, that could be distressful too. If neither of these things is true, then okay, no, this person is not in distress. The person has eyes, and they can be teary or puffy. So this is very simple, but we can see that that's how you can start to model reality. So of course, we will need more complete, more detailed set of properties and behaviors to model the actual world. But this is a way to describe it. So then we have activity. So I separate activity and action because you can be eating and the primary action is to eat, drinking the same thing. That way you can say when a well, I found that I had to separate the activity of eating from the action of to eat. That's how the model worked better. So an action, a generic action, has properties like these are like parameters. So the activity is required, and the subject is also required. So when you start the activity, then what happens is that we add the activity, whatever it is, to be eat or to be drink, to the subject's current activities. So you can be eating and crying at the same time. So you can have both. And when you stop it, we that's how we manage the current activity. So we have I have several what do you call it triggers. So you can start, you can begin, you can continue and restart. We can think of this as messages, right? Or you can stop, pause, cancel, end, or finish. So those triggers result in certain commands, like adding an activity to the set of activities or removing it. So the eat action is you can think of it as a subclass of action. So it's like a class.
Ernest, we're getting to the end of the allotted time. You want to wrap up, or you post a conclusion?
Yes. So, well, through this model, I want to make sure that people have the option of owning their knowledge and owning the tools to work on the knowledge, and they don't have to cede any control to other entities. One important thing is to trust your tools. So one of the this is what I'm working on. This is kind of like a chat thing. So making sure that it understands language. So it's like when you're talking to it, you have to make sure that it understands what you're saying. So in this mode, it tells you, okay, you wrote a sentence, and it's gonna decompose the sentence into its components, and so that you are sure that it understands what you're saying. You don't have to imagine that it understands. And this would facilitate communal reasoning. If you separate knowledge from language, then multiple people with different languages can operate on the same knowledge set. And I think this is something that we haven't done very well recently, but I think this model will facilitate that. People can coalesce their knowledge sets so that they can interact with more efficiently and effectively. And one of the great practical things is we can teach systems to communicate with us, so that instead of error messages that are not really helpful or that do not explain the situation that a system encountered really well, if we give the system knowledge about its own configuration, its state, its tasks, what it has to do, then with a good mapping and smart agents, you can take that state and explain it to the operator without having to write all kinds of error messages for every particular situation. So we can embed with systems like this, we can improve programming, because you don't just program the code, the algorithm. You also program in the knowledge of the system so that it can explain itself to its operator. And so that's it.
All right.
Yeah.
Tom, are you back? I know you had some network gaps there.
Yeah, I got an interruption from one of my sons who needed some call minutes.
Okay.
Data minutes. And then everything.
Wanna...
I had a small remark. This thing about hungry and thirsty and tired being binary, that's a simplification, but it's, of course, not a useful one in many contexts. There are degrees, I'm sure you agree, of hungriness, tiredness, etc. And I'm kind of fanatic about putting that variability on those qualities into a system.
Yes, of course. This is just something simple to try to get the point across. But yes, yeah, we're complicated beings, and yeah, we have.
Okay. Accept it as a simplification, as long as you don't believe that's literally true.
No.
Okay, I'm done, and I'm very interested in this. By the way, I also put a talk I've held and since we last talked called AI Quality, and so the slides for it I've put in the chat and in your emails. And it talks about quantifying things like transparency and security of an AI system.
That sounds interesting.
Look at it afterwards. That's all remarks I have. We're driving to feed a cat.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So you're not worried about your AI because you're busy serving your cat.
I'm not worried. I'm worried that people have difficulty understanding what's going on, and I'm worried that people can get fooled by it. But what's new with fake news? And I'm sure it can be put to very bad purposes, but we've had plenty of guns and fake news and other things before that. So it's just I don't know. It's not what worries me. What worries me is people's level of common sense and logic and education for understanding things. It'd be nice if there were an AI system that gave people back their common sense. Now, there's an idea.
Yeah. By the way, on that note, have you seen Conmigo?
No.
So Conmigo is Sal Khan from Khan Academy. They have a this is actually very apropos because they
I know about the Khan Academy, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So they did, I think, exactly the kind of thing that I think is possible today, which is they took these large language models that these big people have developed, and they said, okay, we are going to solve a very specific problem. We want to help students get accurate, actionable feedback to help them learn. Right. And they very deliberately trained their model to answer. They trained it on their curriculum, and they integrated it with a bunch of clever techniques and formal tools, including where they get, ChatAI to generate an answer, or ChatGPT generate an answer, and then they say, now critique the answer. So they taught AI to think before it speaks, which is something I still struggle with myself. So that was impressive.
Yeah.
And they have a system that they can trust, and it'll say, like, you can say it, tell me the answer to this problem. I'm sorry, I'm your assistant. I can't tell you the answer. Let me ask you a question to help you figure out the answer. And what they did is they created a very narrow domain-specific way that they trust to solve their problem. And
very good.
It's a small, it does basically math and maybe some reading types of things. It doesn't necessarily teach all the skills of critical reasoning, but it's a heck of a step in the right direction.
If you got a good link for,
I already put the link in the chat. I will.
Can you email instead of chat, because chat's going to disappear?
Yeah, I'll put it in the thread, and I'll try to remember to
or the messages. Messages are equally good for me.
Yeah, let's. I'll send that one now before I forget it.
I didn't know about that. I like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that is a very new thing. But anyway, so Ernest, let me say, I think the big thing that you're saying that I really read is very helpful is you want to have trustworthy AI or trustworthy machine knowledge.
Exactly.
Right.
The
Okay.
latter.
Right. Trustworthy machine. So let's actually take a minute and let's like write this down, because I think this is an important concept to formalize. So because I think that the idea is really good. I have some concerns about the mechanisms for getting there. Okay. So but this is val planning, right? So you want where they're owning the data set, you're controlling all, you're ensuring that it reflects their values, I guess our values and trust relationships,
Mhm.
right?
Claim.
Explainability, provenance, citing sources. So these are sort of the values we want to make sure are reflected by the system,
Correct. Yes.
right? So now, there's a second set of things which are tangential to that, which are also important, which is, you mentioned the thing like, copyright and, exploitation, which is something. And then there's a question is, is this a choice, can we choose to opt in? Opt into this world, right? And then, how do we encode and train those models? Some of the things we talked about, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so this first in here, I think this is really good. I think these are important values. I think there's a core challenge that comes around this issue of encoding, which is that people have tried and did try for a decade or two to build formal encoded systems. The most successful of these is called KBpedia, which I put a link in the chat for you.
Okay.
So this is somebody trying to say, let's take the OWL ontology, which is the sort of formal way of expressing encoding relationships between words to create knowledge.
Mhm.
Like this is like Tim Berners-Lee lost a decade of his life building this thing. He tried to build a web around it, the semantic web. It was an utter failure pretty much across the board because it was just freakishly hard to do. And the canonical problem is pronouns. It's obvious that that's the real problem. What does the word it refer to in that sentence? And like AI for, all the machine learning models, all the formal knowledge systems, they would just crash and burn against pronoun reference problems.
Mhm.
And so what happened was they finally decided we can't figure this out in coding way. The only practical way to solve some of these questions, because I can't explain to you how I know what a pronoun is and what it refers to. Either I do or I don't. And sometimes when I get it wrong, and sometimes I can figure it out. But really, most of the rules we use, most of the knowledge we have is not something people read in a book so they understand it formally. They did it in real life. They had a bunch of experiences. They formed patterns and habits and values that they use to guide their behavior. The sort of implicit knowledge is most of what doctors and even lawyers learn. It's implicit knowledge that they don't know how to encode. And so the reason people turn to machine learning on natural language, these unsupervised models, is because, and I'm not saying this is right, I just want you to understand what people did. They tried really hard to come up with these formal models. They failed. They said, okay, let's just throw thousands of examples and see if they can figure it out. And if you point it out, it works amazingly well most of the time and fails spectacularly the rest of the time.
Mhm.
And that is the challenge they're facing. So what seems to be working is, I don't think we can go back to a world where we encode everything formally, but I think what you laid out was actually an interesting way of thinking about this that I might tweak a little bit, is that we need to have a, a trustworthy core language model. Like there's certain things that like, you just like to learn how English, this is the problem I always have with common ValPlan. We have to define all your terms. You can't define all your terms except by using other words. At some point, it's just words all the way down. And how do you even know what that word means other than by direct experience or in relation to other words? And so at some point, you're stuck with words and you need to have some minimal set of words to talk and reason about. And those things need, I think they absolutely should be, well curated, values aligned, bias aware, and personalizable, and redefinable. But
Yes.
you need something like an LLM. Just look at large amounts of data and you have some sort of basic language model. Just because the basic rules of language themselves are just unencodable despite our best efforts over the years. But so you want to at least trace it, like, look, give me a sense of like the Encyclopedia Britannica or something. Don't just scrape the random internet and pick up all the hate speech and racism and disinformation, right? You need to have it something that's core. Right now, they're trying to do two things at once. They want to answer every question and they want to have a reliable model. And I think that's the problem. Is that it's ignorant, trustworthy, and ideally you want to be self-aware of its limitations, right? That's what you really want is a model to be able to say, I don't know, right? That is the hardest thing to get any expert, human or machine, to say, I don't know, I shouldn't answer that question. So that's what you have to have a minimal set. I'll say like, hey, I know these words, I know these things. I don't know anything about that. I'm not going to have an opinion on it. That would be what you want from a core language. It can talk to you, and it knows how to talk and use basic language and some basic words, but it says, I don't know what that word means, or I don't know how to answer that question. And that's where you can start. But you need something that can, like, the conversational understanding language part is really hard. And you need something that can do that. But it can understand the questions, even if it doesn't know.
And I think that I don't know could be expressed in more than black and white. Like I'm a little bit unsure, or I'm very unsure, to hint.
Yeah, sure. And appropriate. Okay, but then the second thing is you need domain specific chains of inference. I think that's the interesting thing is if you have that core language model, then you want to be able to say, okay, then, and this is what was interesting about the Bing search engine, is that they had ChatGPT in the back end, but when you asked it a question, it would do a search. It would then feed the results of that search to the ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT would say, okay, here's your answer based on these 5 web pages. And so the detailed information and the precise claims had explicit provenance. And so it's doing explicit reasoning over very concrete referenceable data sources that say, this is what I believe in. And that is what you want from a model, right? Is that you would like it to just implicitly understand the language and the context of what I'm talking about. But then if it's going to tell me something, it doesn't just make something up or rely on its information. It says like, okay, let me look it up in this well-defined, respected tool. Let me give you some concrete answers, and then let me summarize and say, this is what having done this research, this is what, like if you have an intern, this is what you want from them. You say, here's the problem, go research it. And they come back and say, okay, here's the 5 sources I consulted. Here's the model I created to synthesize it, and here's the result. Well, that was a first-year management consultant. That was exactly what I did. I had no domain knowledge whatsoever, but I understood the words the manager said most of the time, and I knew how to look up the stuff I didn't know, and then they could trust me appropriately, right? Because they had a relational communication thing and then explicit knowledge of the domain. And my claim is that I think you need both of those things to get to this world you want. let me pause there and see if that resonates with you. Tom likes it. How do you feel, Ernest?
So yeah, I agree with most of what you said and wrote here. So you start from a trustworthy core language model. So does that include the knowledge? Are you combining knowledge and the language model, or is this?
Well, so the point is, it has some basic knowledge of the world, but it's got some, it's sort of like, basic, uncontroversial facts.
When you say what of the world,
like if you say that, if you say what a chair is, it doesn't have to look up a definition of a chair. Let's Encyclopedia Britannica is kind of a good placeholder for that. It's not perfect, but on the order of something like that, right? Is that it doesn't have current events, it doesn't have all possible pieces of information, but it's like, everyday knowledge.
It's like a high school diploma type thing. Okay.
Or maybe junior high, junior high knowledge. In case you haven't noticed, we're having violent disagreements in our culture, let's just say elementary school.
Okay.
Elementary knowledge, right? Well, and the idea is that, of course, the smarter and faster this section 2 is, the less core knowledge you need in, right? Is that this is that, and the point, this is sort of unsupervised. You want to just slurp this up and just trust it, so it's part of its core mental base. But this is more sort of supervised. This is where you have to actually have well-curated knowledge on top of it. But the idea is that if you have a system, it's like in 3rd grade, there's this thing that happens where until 3rd grade, you're teaching kids to read. And then after 3rd grade, you use reading to teach kids. There's a big change that happens once they're able to read. And if you can teach a machine to read and to ask the right questions, then it's so much easier to teach it everything else. Otherwise, everything has to be formally spelled out, and that is an incredible pain. And it may actually be impossible. And so maybe that's actually it's a 3rd grader who can read, right? And you would not trust a 3rd grader with very much of anything. Certainly, but you would trust them if they can read and they can look it up and give you an answer and tell you what they found. And if they happen to be a supercomputer that can read insanely fast from a million different sources, actually, I really like that picture that I should trust AI the way I would trust, which I did have, frankly, a hyper-intelligent 3rd grader, is that they would say a lot of stuff I didn't believe, but if they said, hey, I looked it up and here's my sources, like, crap, you're right, I'm wrong. And that's the vision. That's how I want humanity to relate to AI, right? Treat AI as a super smart 3rd grader who can read. And don't trust them, implicitly, but if they look something up, and they're really good at looking stuff and they cite their sources, eventually you'll take them seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so the other point I want to make is that so I think that's a model of like what we want to build, and I think it's certainly possible today. And I think that rather than doing, full building everything from scratch, there are people building small curated language models that are like run on your own computer, trained on your own data set, and thinking about finding a good domain where, because, like I said, the world changes so fast that what was a big research problem 6 months ago is a hobbyist project, next month. And so I think, like even in a month, I feel like the world has changed from when you started writing this. But I think there are domains where there's room for that. There's a secondary challenge, which is that you said, like, hopefully we're not going to be forced to use these models. And I had a fascinating conversation when I was doing a customer sales call, and we were talking about our kids. Like, can I have kids and have them not use technology? He says, that works right up until the point where all their friends are using phones. And if they don't have a phone, they're not going to get invited to anything ever. And they're not going to hear what people are talking about because they don't have the ability to text to them, because that's where the interactions are happening. And it's like, you can do that, but you're excluding yourself from certain social circles. Like if you don't use email, you can't do business today, and there will become a day, maybe not that far away, where certain kinds of business, certain types of industries are going to standardize on AI communication. And if you're not using an AI that can work with them, you are excluded from those communities and relationships. And if those are more productive and more competitive and pay better and gain political power, you will be marginal, right? You can opt out of society and live in Alaska hunting seals by yourself, but if you want to be a part of society, you have to follow society's rules. And my favorite source for this, the ChatGPT report says, AI is not going to take your job, but there's a good chance somebody using AI will take your job if you don't adapt, right? If you're slower and more expensive and more error prone than the guy using AI, you're at a competitive disadvantage, And so, there's a long grade where you can use, and so a smart person using AI well, who knows its limitations, will outcompete both a smart person who doesn't use AI and a smart person and a dumb person using it, right? And it's just like a computer and a human being together can generally still beat either a computer or the best human players because they know how to work together. And this is, I think, the world you want anyway. But the point is that we have to compete against the world of people who I think is a legitimate concern of corporations who have mixed motives and who are have blind spots and laziness, and they're trying to optimize a service they can sell rather than empowering humans to make good decisions.
Correct.
And so there is some urgency and some pragmatism we have to think through about what can we build, what can we propagate, what can we ideally get people to rally behind to create a credible alternative that isn't going to be obsoleted in 6 months by the next big crazy thing.
Exactly. I think being able to sort of guarantee that you won't fall into the drawbacks of the current models, hallucinations and plagiarism and litigation. If you can, because if let's say OpenAI says, okay, forget our crazy agreement, just use it. And we're like people. If something goes wrong, then we owe our mistakes. They can say we vetted the source data that we used to train this model, and we trust our technology. Therefore, we can,
Right, and yeah, absolutely. And like I said, the memo, right, that Google saying we're screwed, OpenAI is screwed, right? So much has happened in the last 6 months that OpenAI is not like the thing to attack anymore. I mean, right? Like there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of stupidity, there's a lot of arrogance there. Fine. That's not really the discussion anymore. There's a lot of alternatives. There's these, llama clones that are sort of gray market Facebook ripoffs. Stable LM, the people with Stable Diffusion, they're building their own models. So there's a whole bunch of open source models coming. The thing that I think is interesting, and it's an interesting challenge if you're willing to take it up, is to really define what we call it humane AI, is maybe a set of principles, kind of like what we did around decentralized systems with Datocracy, of like what are the 5 or 10 values that, and this is an interesting opportunity to think about, is like we talked about doing like a good housekeeping or a rating program for crypto communities because Web3 was really hot. You remember that? We talked about that, taking your 10 values of a decentralized system and voting and governance and applying both the architecture and the governance that we could apply to Web3 community. How good is your architecture? How good is your governance? Right? is maybe it would be a good exercise for us over the next month to build a similar values checklist for Humane AI. Hey, if you're building an AI system, these are the things, and we work with Tom and we ValPlan it out. We have really precise quantifiable metrics of these are the 10 things that a Humane AI system should do. And that's something that we could build that is not technology dependent, right? Because if we build it in any technology we build, it's going to be obsolete in 6 months. But if we build a value system, which is our core strength, and we ValPlan it out so it's precise and quantifiable, measurable, that's marketable, right? That we could take to somebody and say, hey, we would like to build a council that's going to grade AI projects around their technology and their governance, but how humane they are. And we want to build a consortium of people who's a watchdog on all the corporations, all the open source projects, all the small businesses that are using AI to keep them honest. Nobody seems to be doing that. And I think
actually, I did hear about.
There's something called ethical AI systems,
right,
and I think it's pretty close to Humane, and there is a lot of activity there. You'll find some of that explicitly in my set of slides. For example, the IEEE has an ethical committee looking at things like transparency, things like that. But by the way, I'm up for that homework. Not necessarily doing it alone, but kicking it back and forth, drafts, and making it better.
Yeah, and I think that there's a we definitely agree with you. And I'm skeptical that industry consortiums will actually prioritize ethics that disempower large corporations in the favor of small communities of people, but I'm willing to be pleasantly surprised. If not, it's a market opportunity. All right.
Yeah.
So maybe I will put together an email with some links and send it out, and then we can discuss it online and figure out an action item to present for next month.
Yeah, but there is what I wanted to say is that there is something called Constitution AI. It's a company that says we have a constitution. I don't know if it's the same thing that Tom mentioned, but they're saying we're gonna have a constitution. So I think if you Google Constitution AI, you will get it.
There's some interesting work there where you can give an AI a constitution where you give it a sense of principles and it uses its own language to judge itself, which is very clever.
Which is what we've been talking about this thing for months.
Yes, except that, but the thing is that it's not right, and this is what we've been talking about for months. I think the point is that it wouldn't hurt to be able to use AI to judge these systems, but the important thing is that humans should judge the humans running these systems, and whether we use AI to help us is a secondary thing, right? And this is humans have to trust humans, and this is the thing you've been passionate about. How do we encode the way we trust each other so that we can make reasonable decisions about that? And I think that is really applicable to AI as well. So, okay, I have an action item to send an email out. It may not happen before Monday, but we will follow it on email and pick it up from there. All right?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us. I hope your cat is well fed, Tom.
Yeah, the cat looks well fed. We just arrived and it just arrived and greeted us.
All right.
My son Kai's cat.
This is a successful meeting. Take care.
Okay. Bye, Ernie.
Yes.
Bye-bye.